Welcome to Legacy Lady Tales. You'll find stories that stir your spirit, awaken your purpose, and draw you closer to God. Let's begin. There was nothing particularly unusual about the room. Everything was in its place. The bed was neatly made, untouched, as though no one had truly rested in it. Soft light filtered through the curtains, not bright enough to energize the space, but just enough to reveal the stillness within it. Dust floated gently in the air, visible only when the light caught it at the right angle. It was quiet, not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that makes you aware of every thought you're trying to ignore. On the bedside table lay a closed Bible, not forgotten, just untouched. Next to it, a phone rested face up, lighting up every now and then with notifications that went unanswered. From the outside, everything looked normal. Nothing was broken, nothing was missing, and yet something felt different. She sat at the edge of the bed, her hands resting against the fabric, her eyes moving slowly across the room, as if searching for something she couldn't quite name. This was her space, her routine, her life, but it no longer felt the same. There was a time when this very room felt comforting, when the same phone brought excitement, when conversations flowed easily and laughter came without effort. But now, there was a disconnect. She reached for her phone, almost out of habit more than desire, and began to scroll. Faces, voices, moments, all familiar, but strangely distant. She paused, her thumb hovered over the screen as something subtle but undeniable settled within her. A quiet realization she couldn't explain. Why does this feel different? There was no clear answer. No event she could point to, no moment where everything suddenly changed. It had happened slowly, quietly, almost unnoticeable, until now. She locked the phone and placed it beside her. The silence returned, heavier this time. It wasn't that anything was wrong. That was the confusing part. Everything was fine, and yet deep within her, something was not. She leaned back slightly, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, her thoughts louder than the silence around her. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe it would just pass. But even as those thoughts came, they didn't settle, because deep down she knew this wasn't just a passing feeling. This wasn't just a phase. Something within her had shifted, and for the very first time, she couldn't ignore it. There is a kind of silence that is not empty, but crowded. It was in that silence that the questions began to rise. Not loud, not dramatic, but persistent, like thoughts that refused to leave you alone. She sat still, but her mind was not still. Her eyes moved slowly around the room again, as if looking for something that might explain what she was feeling. But the room remained unchanged, familiar, ordinary, quiet, and yet inside her, everything felt unsettled. Why does this feel different now? The question came again, not as a voice from outside, but as a whisper within. She tried to dismiss it. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I'm just tired. Maybe it's nothing. But even as those thoughts came, they didn't bring peace. They only added weight. She stood up slowly from the bed and walked toward the mirror. Not because she planned to, but because something in her was searching for answers. She looked at her reflection, and for a moment she didn't recognize the feeling staring back at her. Not because her face had changed, but because something deeper had. There was a quiet tension between who she was and who she was becoming. And she didn't know how to hold both at the same time. She studied herself in silence, the same eyes, the same face, the same life, but not the same presence. It felt like standing in between two versions of yourself. One you can no longer return to, and one you don't yet fully understand. And that is where the confusion begins. Not in chaos, but in clarity that arrives too early, because something inside her was changing before she had language for it, before she had explanation for it, before she had permission to understand it. And the hardest part was not the change itself, but the silence around it. No one else seemed to notice it. No one else seemed to feel it. No one else seemed to understand why she was suddenly distant, even when she was still present. So she kept it inside, like most people do. But inside, the question remained, quiet, unresolved, growing. What is happening to me? And deep down beneath the confusion, there was something else beginning to surface. Not fear, not panic, but awareness. Something is shifting. The room was still, but the silence had changed. It was no longer just heavy with thought. It was now heavy with presence. She had stopped searching for answers in the mirror. She had stopped trying to explain what she felt. She had stopped wrestling with thoughts that had no resolution. And in that stillness, something shifted. Not outside of her, but within her awareness. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't shake the room or announce itself. It came like a whisper. Not from the environment, but from within the quiet. And for the first time, she stopped trying to interpret her thoughts. She simply listened. There are moments when life becomes so still that you begin to hear what was always there but never noticed. And in that silence, a truth began to rise. You are not losing yourself. The thought didn't come from fear. It came from a strange sense of calm. You are not losing yourself. You are letting go of what no longer fits you. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in this entire experience, she didn't resist the feeling because something about it felt true. Even if she didn't fully understand it yet, the confusion didn't disappear, but it stopped leading. And slowly, very slowly, the weight she had been carrying in silence began to feel different. Not gone, but reframed. This is not confusion. This is transformation. The words didn't feel like imagination anymore. They felt like clarity arriving late, but exactly when it was needed. She exhaled, not in relief, but in recognition, because deep down, something in her already knew. She was not going back to who she used to be, and maybe she was never meant to. The silence remained, but now it was no longer empty. It was holding something. It was holding an understanding that something was not breaking, but something was becoming. The silence remained, but it no longer felt the same. What once felt heavy now felt steady. She was still sitting in the same room, same space, same walls, same light, but something within her had shifted in how she saw it all. The confusion had not completely disappeared, but it no longer controlled her thoughts. Instead of fighting what she felt, she began to observe it. Quietly, gently, without panic. And in that space of surrender, Understanding began to form, not as a sudden answer, but as a growing awareness. Maybe nothing is wrong. The thought came softly, not as denial, but as acceptance trying to take shape. Maybe I'm not breaking. Maybe I'm becoming. She repeated it in her mind slowly, not because she fully believed it yet, but because something in it felt honest. The pieces of her experience were still there. The distance she felt, the changes she couldn't explain, the disconnection from what used to feel normal, but now they no longer felt like signs of loss. They felt like signs of movement, and for the first time, she considered that not everything meant confusion. Some things meant transition. She stood up slowly, not with urgency, not with fear, but with awareness. And as she looked around the room again, it was still the same room, but she was no longer the same observer. Because sometimes nothing around you changes until something within you learns how to see differently. And in that moment, she understood something she couldn't explain before. This is not an ending. This is a beginning. Not everything is meant to stay the same. Not every version of you is meant to remain. Some things are released quietly. Some things are outgrown silently. And some changes are simply the beginning of becoming. She picked up the Bible from the bedside table. Still closed, still untouched, but now not forgotten. She held it for a moment, not for answers, but for grounding. And then she understood something deeper. The shift was never something happening to her. It was something happening within her. And that changed everything.